Hello, Tim. This is me, Rob, here with my video giving advice from my perspective on your game, 18 Inches of Blood. It's a very interesting game. I think it has a lot of potential, but it needs a bit of work. I'm sure you're aware of that. So in this video, what I hope to do is not specifically nail individual edits. I'll be doing that, don't worry about it. You saw some of what I do from the little blurb I sent you, but there's a lot more to do. With my edits, I usually suggest things to fill in spaces or to manufacture things where there isn't any, to strike out things that are unnecessary, and so on. So, that being said, this isn't that. This is going to be me going through your book, page by page, and just outlining the things that I think should be improved, polished, worked on, etc., etc., etc. So, well, your work is the star of this show, so we'll begin. Title page is fine, although the title 18 Inches of Blood is nice and evocative. What does it mean? You probably should list that somewhere. If it's a reference to something like, I don't know, the distance from the length of the aorta, for instance, or I'm not sure exactly where you get it from. Like I said, it's nice and evocative, but it would be neat if you put somewhere in there where you get it from, or if there's nowhere where you get it from, then just leave it out. But if that's meant to be from something, I'd probably put it in. Okay. So, out of the 91 pages of the text that you sent me, we get to the second page, which is your disclaimer, which is fine. The disclaimer is you talking, so whatever you put on it is, perfectly fine. That's on the page 2. One more fantasy game, but this one is mine. I would probably go more with a quote from Full Metal Jacket. There are many like this, but this one is mine. There are many fantasy role-playing games, but this one is mine. I think would work there. And then you go into a paragraph that introduces your story, but it's in a conversational tone. Hello there. This is my attempt. Honestly, if you're going to go that way, I would recommend taking it from the point of view of you introducing yourself and doing that. So, hello there, I'm Tim. I've been a gamer for this long, or, whatever credential you want to put out there for why you wanted to make this game. And I would honestly go away from saying these are all taken from different games, and instead saying these are inspired by my contact with other games. Don't tell people that there are other games out there that you could be playing other than this one. Just say that this is been inspired by lots of other games that you've come into contact with. It's minor quibble, and the way you have it is fine. It's just a tone you might want to think about. Likewise, copyright law does not protect game mechanics, so you can freely say that you have cribbed your ideas from other games' mechanics, which is fine. I wouldn't dwell on it overly much. I'd rather explain in that paragraph why you want to put out your game specifically. But, as it is, thematically right now it's fine. The introducing RPGs to the uninitiated. I think you should do it. I think you should give more detail on what is a role-playing game. On the edit that I sent you, the sampler, I actually go over this. It's a relatively simple thing to tell people what a role-playing game is. Every single one of them does it. There's no reason not to. You could do that in just a couple of words. A role-playing game is a pastime wherein a group of people get together and one of them takes charge of the scenario and narrates and makes rulings on the rules. All the others play major characters of the ongoing story that they share. Doesn't have to be, reinventing the wheel. If you're already admitting that you're borrowing mechanics, this is a nice thing, because then not only do veteran players, I know this was your idea, you want people who are veteran players to play your game, but it's nice to have a nod for those who don't. And you, like you said, you do say so, introducing RPGs to the uninitiated. So there you go. You might as well do it. I would not recommend steering people off to go to other sources to find out what role-playing games are. We can do that comfortably here. It wouldn't take any more space than what you already have for saying, check this out from somewhere else. The part on that play is beneficial and important, I would hold to the end of the paragraph, because you would probably more want to explain why somebody would want to play a messed up game where, horrible things are discussed. Play is beneficial, and playing horror games helps to unlock those tensions and anxieties and provide a bit of catharsis to people, which they do. That's why we like horror games so much. Otherwise, I have no problem with highlighting the social, societal, and personality advantages of role-playing games. You're a little too apologetic there. It's just all I'm going to say on that. But I like the idea of saying, this is a reason why you should think about it. Again, I wouldn't worry about steering people to other games as much. But I like the personal approach again. In some ways, I envy you, because if this is your first game, you're going to get to play a game, and I can never do this again my first time. So. Okay, you go into the mechanics right away, which is fine, but honestly, if you're introducing your game as, it's an atmospheric game, it's not just a straightforward fantasy, story, I would probably take the mechanics and push them to the back. Finish introducing your story. What makes it horrible? Why is it gory? Why, set expectations for what the players coming into your game, what kind of experience they're going to have, what it's going to be like to run this game. Is this game really relatively rules light? So, game masters, don't be afraid. This isn't going to be overly challenging for you. Just spin a story and we'll work through it. Players, don't worry about having to learn a bunch of rules right away. My mechanics are simple, as they are, and should be. So I would probably have something like that as your opening rather than going straight into the mechanics. But now that we're at the mechanics on this page, the fourth page of 91, majority of dice rolls involve rolling one 10-sided die and then checking to see if you've rolled in the success range for that attempted action. I would not say details for determining the success range. I would instead do a loose definition. The success range is based on how skilled you are. A more skilled player is going to have a wider success range and a better chance of success. I wouldn't tap dance around that. I'd obliquely attack it in that sentence. Anything that you say and then you immediately reference to another part of a book, or worse yet, reference to another work altogether, unless you're referencing to another work of yours, I would try to steer clear of that. It's not a good look for a role-playing game, quite honestly. If you're only touching on these dice mechanics, I wouldn't bother with an example so much. I would just, unless it's highlighting exactly how simple your system is, I would steer clear of working on the mechanics until you're at a point in the story of, the narrative of why you're playing this game. You're still doing the introduction. I would probably hold that until a little bit later. What you have there is all right, although, again, stats generated and what, just save that to character creation. I wouldn't use it in discussing the mechanics, because those are two different things. You're talking game mechanics versus generation mechanics. You don't really need to bring up generation mechanics except in the chapter where you're discussing how to create the character. So that's kind of what I would recommend for that. It's just a little shuffling, a little, switching things around. You don't have to lose any work, and you don't have to uproot anything, but it's a good thing to do. When attack rolls are successful, a variety of dice. Okay, again, this is on the combat section, discussing, the combat. Again, for an introductory, you might want to just discuss, You need these dice. You use primarily the 10-sided dice for resolution. The other dice are primarily used for character generation or combat. That blanket general statement prepares people for what's coming, but it doesn't go off into things that they won't need until later. If you want to think about your work as a river, it has to have a beginning, it has to flow somewhere, and it should generally try to continue along in a continuous path, one thing leading to another, rather than a lot of starts and stops and things. These are the kind of rough edges that you want to smooth out with editing. So approaching it now and thinking about it is a good time to do it. So for the most part, the section on dice mechanics should maybe be just a small reference to how some of the mechanics go, but not breaking down bit by bit, piece by piece. Next page. Statistics and stats. Okay. I know that games like Dungeons and Dragons have things like statistics early on with character generation. So if we're going into statistics and defining them, in my game, put the statistics and descriptions in with the character generation. You're fine where you're at, though. But the first thing that you go into with statistics, the race the player picks affects the chance that they have of getting higher or lower stats, which is fine. Stats have a maximum of 18. That's a specific detail rather than a general detail. I think in this it would be better to broadly describe what your stats are, which are classifications for the abilities of your characters as summed up by numbers to allow for easy resolution of conflict and overcoming obstacles. Quite honestly, I would also save the burning stats as a mechanic for a bit later on. If you're going to bring up stats and statistics, I would describe each of the statistics first, what they're used for, how they affect the game. Generally, it's the way almost everybody does it, and it works from a logical flow perspective. So before you even get to burning, which is a core, an important part of your game, I would recommend having the section on statistics. So I'm actually going to jump ahead. No, I'm not. It's just complicated on this laptop. So I would move the things to statistics to that part. Burning stats. It's a key point to your game. In that, it's something that you should expect players to do, to latch on to as a mechanic. And that's fine, that's cool. But you have to really explain why. Reducing your character is usually anathema to a role-playing game. They're usually about building up your characters. You have a mechanic where you bring down your characters to do something. So when you have this section, you should really think about how you can frame it so that players can get excited about this element that, okay, I can buy success out of failure. It's going to hurt a little, but I can do it. The more I do it, the closer I become a character who can't do this anymore. So it's important to celebrate those moments where you do triumph and what you're willing to do to triumph. As it is, there isn't a lot there that really, outside of very clinically describing the process, and again, referencing a bunch of other books, it's something that should have a bit of love attached to the background and the world and making it feel more real, more intimate, and uncomfortably intimate, with the idea that your character's well-being is going to be sacrificed on the altar of accomplishing their goals. This isn't a game where your characters, like in a movie and cinematically, can come through anything unscathed. A dapple of magical healing and they're back in the thick of things. This is a game about your character eventually grinding themselves down on the millstone of their chosen professions, and the experiences that they have are going to permanently change them. This is something that you want to describe, and you want to really, when you're ready to bring this up, nail home that This is a good thing, but it's also something that will leave scars. As far as the whole burning thing, I understand that it has an advantage in that instead of saving throws, your characters are going to have some sacrifices. Clearly, you have a saving throw mechanic as well, but if you fail a saving throw, the possibility of not dying but scarring yourself is a nice concept. Like I said, and you reference other games have things like that. But in this case, this is going to be something that's going to be element. Why not punch it up a little bit? We should probably, if you're going to the mechanic, you should probably have multiple layers. Everything that you do costs. If you want to cast a spell, it's going to cost you. Maybe not in permanent statistics. Otherwise wizards would quickly be drooling idiots or so frail that they couldn't adventure. But if you have exhaustion, which recovers slowly, but it does lower your statistic as you're going, and then you also have the burning mechanic, you have things that can be tiered at their cost. A wizard casting, common spells that they're very familiar with, much like a wizard swinging a sword, probably shouldn't have a cost. A wizard doing a more challenging spell that tips the balance towards them should probably have a commensurate cost, but if you don't want them to use that ability, then the permanent cost makes sense. But if it should have impact and tactical consideration for the player, an exhaustion state probably should be a good idea. And this should be addressed on your character sheet. You should have statistic, exhaustion level, and then you permanently change the statistic with burning. I also discussed with you getting rid of the power statistic. If you instead make everything have a drain cost, where it exhausts your character or possibly damages them for the most powerful spells. For a lot of people in D&D, they just rush to get the most powerful spells they can, and then Meteor Swarm, they solve all their problems with their most powerful spell. But what happens if they rush to get that forbidden knowledge, but every time they cast it, it leaves permanent scars? Now all of a sudden they'll still have it, but they'll have to wonder, is this the time that I need to uncork this? Something to think about. Because that could really change your game from another D&D-esque clone to this is its own new genre with some interesting mechanics that could change the game. So, that is why I would get rid of the power statistic altogether. It's an extra resource that makes the characters think that they have something they can draw from. Instead, some spells, once you get to a certain experience level or what have you, may eventually become trivial, but powerful spells should have a cost. Again, possibly an exhaustion. The most powerful spells, a permanent cost. You permanently disfigure yourself to cast it, or what have you. Imagine the Emperor and Mace Windu in their duel in Episode 3 of Star Wars. By using his Force Lightning in such a power as he's trying to drive off Mace Windu, the Emperor is scarred. And he gets his trademark look of being half-cooked. This is the kind of thing you're going for? Then this is a good idea, and having an extra power stat doesn't really help that any. Getting rid of it simplifies the game, and it gets rid of something that players can have that makes them feel comfortable. It's reworking things, but it's got a significant advantage for your system, which is why I heartily endorse it. Of course I endorse it. I'm the one who says it. But still, as far as a lot of the other ones, many of them, I would say, categorize them in how they can be expended. For example, your Constitution would be permanently burned to get you past things that involve physical challenges or hardships. That makes sense. Your appearance could take a hit if you accept a nasty scar instead of a mortal wound, for instance. So if you don't want to take the physical blow that most adventurers do, that could risk them dying. Instead, they take a scar, so they have a narrative impact. And all of a sudden now, you actually have warriors who look appropriate, like they've been through fights, unlike Dungeons and Dragons, where they always look perfect because they're magically healed. And, many of the other ones. Willpower, accepting permanently damaging, basically your mental health being damaged by traumatic impact. I mean, this is a reflection of, PTSD and other mental illnesses. Actually draining your attribute and burning off your attribute reflects in a very elegant mechanical sense lowering of the statistic and dampening of your potential there because of what you have experienced and gone through. So, yeah. That's how most of these burning things work well, when you accept what they are, and this is your idea. This is nothing new to you, but couching them as such. The burning and name looks good on paper, but honestly, I would even step slightly away from that and just have a description of the act, like sacrifice the body for, instead of burning blood and pain. Also, you can burn, if you burn your blood pool, which is the amount of points you have, especially from supernatural things. That could be another effective resource that people can tap to pull off things, especially things like sorcery. I'm not going to go into a mechanic by mechanic breakdown of that, but it's just something to think about. Some of them, like burning intimidation. 1 point of Constitution could be burned to intimidate enemies. That doesn't thrill me, I'll be honest. And I'm curious about the sacrifice ones, where you sacrifice to help somebody else out. Do you think this is actually ever going to be done in a game? I just, all I see it doing is being exploited by players. When they've been permanently weakened or scarred, they make sure that the next character is buffed up, or other characters in the group are buffed up by dumping their stats into somebody else. I don't see a really great benefit in it, but maybe it's just because it isn't explained to me well enough in this why anybody would do this. But it seems like cheese that would be taken advantage of by the right groups, just dumping their statistics into one common player, making a super character, and then these characters are retired or dead because, under the best of circumstances, it's because they would pour their learning experience into another player who's going to go on where they can no longer do it, basically driving themselves to idiocy doing this. I don't see how that really works. It's something that I probably would not have myself. Of course, it's your game, but I don't see it. That's just me, however. On the other hand, having a ritual in your game by which somebody can do this, now that's a good idea. And again, could really emphasize the sacrifice nature of your game. But I wouldn't have just, the fighter, as he's at 1 hit point, nobody's going to survive. Here, wizard, I'll just give you my intelligence because I don't need it. I don't see it. I don't really like it. It also lends itself out to min-maxing, because not only can you drop 2, add 1, you can drop 2 off of your stat and give it to somebody else. So, you can make sure that wizard is super maxed by, the fighter who rolled a 13 for his intelligence, dumping that down to idiocy to fluff up the wizard. I don't like those. That's just me, but... So that would be the burning gift. I would not recommend. The burning immunity, I think, is fine. There have been many situations in literature and that of people gaining immunity to poisons from exposure, and I think if you burn a point of Constitution for that, or possibly burn a bit of your blood pool for that, I am fine with that. I like it, as a matter of fact. The burning blood and pain, I'm fine with negating all blood loss or removing all pain penalties. That's fine, but that could probably be done with exhaustion more so than total sacrifice. Just a thought. You know, you suffer all of the effects of lowering your constitution or strength when you do that, so that represents something that can be regained if you've pushed yourself from rest. May not be quite as bleak, but it could be effective and something that people would use a bit more often. The blood magic, I would think also the blood pool could be tapped for that. Again, let's get rid of the power points. Basically, by blood magic, we're talking about a spell has a cost of exhaustion or possibly permanent burning of a stat for your magic. I like that. Burning critical. Burn one random stat by a point. The next time a die roll is called for, it's automatically a critical. If you consider that you are giving up your potential to some dark god of fortune, okay. I could see that. I'm not happy with it as a core mechanic, but I could see it. It could be spelled a certain way, and it could make some sense. Random is a little rough. I don't think you're ever going to get a lot of people who would ever really do that. If it's an attack or damaging spell, you deal a maximum amount of damage as well. I mean, you put the carrot out there, somebody will probably use that ability, but draining a random stat is kind of a tough thing. On the other hand, being able to call for that as a sacrifice of a permanent point of stat is appropriate to, making sure that your next success is a critical. Burning Disfigurement, I like that a lot. Very good. Again, the name I'm not 100% sure on, but I'm fine with that. Burning your dodge to negate an attack that would otherwise hit. If you exhaust your dexterity rather than burning it, you'll get people to use that mechanic a bit more often, and that would represent strains and possibly minor dislocations as somebody threw themselves beyond their physical capabilities to avoid something. I really don't have a huge problem with it, but as far as scaling wise, exhaustion rather than permanent burning might actually get that to be used. Otherwise, I think people are rarely ever going to use it. Burning Fate. By burning point of luck, you can reroll a previous dice roll and take the best result. In that case, your luck is primarily a battery for that, which is fine, I guess. It's like having your fate points to give yourself rerolls. Exhausting it for rerolls might be interesting, and burning it for a guaranteed success. There's mechanisms you can use in there if you're going to entertain the idea of an exhaustion. So something to think about. Burning Focus. Ignore pain that would normally prevent an action from being taken. If you have mechanics in there, then exhausting those things would work. Burning it might work for significantly more dangerous penalties, like staying conscious when you're supposed to be dead. Burning your intelligence or your wisdom for that is certainly interesting. Cultural rituals to ascend to manhood or womanhood might involve grueling tasks. Magical rituals might require this form of personal sacrifice. I would probably leave that as some nebulous. There are dangerous rituals that may require things like that. I don't like the Burning Gift unless you can think of it as a ritual more so than just a game mechanic. Burning Jump, again, exhaustion works a little bit better for that. You're never going to have anybody really use that, unless, of course, again, you're talking about this is a do this or die kind of thing. In which case, they'd probably go to another mechanic like, Burning Luck or something for that rather than, permanently reducing those kind of stats. Permanently reducing your dexterity or strength is pretty much getting you closer to guaranteeing you're going to fail the next one. So, you're not going to have a lot of buyers on these without, ameliorating that somehow. Burning muscles, burn to perform some great feat of athletics. Yes, I'm fine with this. Although exhaustion would work too for certain things, but if you kicked it up a notch, where a person is really hurting themselves to do these things, that's not a bad thing. It actually could work out very well for this game. So yeah, I don't have a problem with the burning muscles. The burning sacrifice. 1 point of counter strength could be burned to sacrifice the body in a physical attempt to do something that would protect other people. I would probably go so far as to say that just getting in the way is probably enough without actually having to lose your point of constitution or anything, because you're already going to, you have mechanics in place. Like if they're getting burned, they take damage and prevent somebody else from it. I don't think that's necessary. So the burning sacrifice, either you need a better description, or the mechanics don't really. There are other consequences for that rather than losing a stat. Burning spirit again, just like burning gift, trading wisdom to another player. I don't think the mechanic, outside of a ritual of some sort, it's got some issues. Permanent power points can be given as a gift to another player. Again, we're getting rid of power points. I would recommend, so that is unnecessary. Burnt saving throw. 1 point of any stat can be burned to completely negate the consequences of failing a saving throw. That's a lot of what you're already doing with a lot of these other things. So, again, it's okay, but you could probably leave that out until you get to another mechanic like that. Then you get to 8 stats. This probably should be above the burning part. I know you're in a rush to get to the burning because that is a big mechanic of your game, but I would actually have described the stats first. Increasing stats. When characters get a level, they add 1 to a single random stat. Why random? I mean, if you are a warrior and every day you are working out with your weapons and you are practicing your muscle, or you are practicing building up your endurance, why would then you increase your intelligence? I don't like that. Excuse me, I guess I'm not completely over my cold. I would recommend increasing a stat every level. Sure, if you're going to cause people to burn them, there's nothing wrong with that. Characters can improve, but random, I wouldn't. If you want random, I would say keep it within the idiom of the character class. Like warriors may improve a random stat of strength, constitution, or dexterity, the things that they use the most and rely upon. For spellcasters, it might be wisdom, intelligence, charisma, what have you. Just a thought. Might be a good thing to have a little sentence notation. Be sure to record your statistics in pencil, because they can go up and down in this game, unlike other games that use similar statistics. Can go up as a character interacting with objects and things during the course of a game. Sure, absolutely. I always like that kind of thing with being able to, the DM and their experiences changing things magically. That's fine. Examples include touching an altar, ripping the gem eyes out of an idol, making a holy sacrifice to a temple. All of those things are religious in nature. I would probably have some magical descriptions. These in-game stat increases are left up to the GM to dole out as they see fit. Yes. Stats can also increase as a result of another character burning. I don't like that. I would probably not do that. Stat modifiers. Your modifiers are basic and simple and easy. Nothing really wrong with that. Having a 1 stat only have a -1 modifier is kind of on the weak side. There's not a lot of penalties to having really low stats in the cellar. Wherein if you're trying to get a fixed scale, it's really bell-ended in this case. But at the same time, I don't like having dice rolls where people think they have absolutely no chance. So I'm not don't have a real problem with your modifiers chart. And it actually seems to work fairly well with your dice mechanic. So, you celebrate those who have really good stats, and you don't severely punish those who have low stats. I'm fine with. This isn't like, rolling 46, drop the low for every single stat, so you're fine. I would have that chart at the end of the description of the statistics, however. Unless you framed it a little bit better, saying all of the statistics are used to modify the success range, and this is how it affects the success range, or this is how it affects dice rolls to get within the success range easier. That I would probably emphasize a little bit more than your basic description, but it's not bad. It's serviceable. It's not worded elegantly, which again, that's editing. Appearance, it's fine. Uses the appearance stats. I would emphasize the appearance stat modifier effects. First impressions. I would also say that it can influence seduction attempts. Certainly appearance can help with that. So, as well as first impressions, if a person is really beautiful, it can continue beyond just first impressions as well. Obviously, charisma kicks into a bigger extent, but it certainly wouldn't stop modifying them if somebody wanted to use those looks for something. So I would definitely highlight that as a use of that statistic. And then I would say your appearance can be burned to reduce damage from an incoming critical blow or something like that, turning a critical blow into a negative one and only taking a scar. That might be an idea for using the burn mechanic, explaining that in a narrative fashion. Constitution, yes, we've all known and loved Constitution. Again, using it. Constitution modifier effects. Healing, blood points, resurrection, saving throw suggestions. Healing would heal additional amount. I love that mechanic. That is a brilliant mechanic. A healthier person restores more. I like it. Good idea, Tim. Blood points at higher levels. When getting a new character level, you add your Constitution modifier and racial blood point bonus, and add that result to your blood pool. I like it. It definitely, that is a nice thing, not to have such a significant penalty to low numbers. If you had a wizard with a 2 Constitution, you'd have constantly, even with a healthy race, you'd have blood pool at a very low level. This is actually a good mechanic. Resurrection, added to a luck modifier when a cleric tries to bring the character back to life. I like that. It's a good, sensible, thought-out application of the attribute. Saving throw suggestions: regaining consciousness if you're knocked out, resisting disease, exhaustion, extreme cold, physical forms of danger that cannot be dodged, poison, inebriation. Special abilities of the undead, but you could just say magical or supernatural effects that affect the well-being of a person, their ability to stay conscious and healthy. And that sums up a lot of things. But it's what we've always been using Constitution for, so I completely agree with that. Dexterity. Dexterity is dexterity. We know what dexterity is for. Dexterity helps your attack range rolls, yes. Ranged weapon damage. I like seeing that in the modern role-playing games where a more accurate shot does more damage, which is true. And I like it in your system. Increasing your defense. Yeah, absolutely. No problems there. Saving throw suggestions. Appearance saving throws can be a thing too, There's a thought. A saving throw versus appearance could be used to avoid indifference, to avoid hostile, social attacks. So if you have a high enough appearance, you might be able to use it to avoid, like I said, people ignoring you, people who are not predisposed to pay attention to you. A high appearance may help you with something like that. Saving throw suggestions: dodging. Anything that can try to get you out of the way. Yes. By the way, I do like the public domain art you've chosen too. There's some really nice things, and it does space things out so that even though this is 91 pages that you've sent me, it's not 91 pages of flat text, which, makes this a lot easier to look through and edit. Intelligence, we know about intelligence. Learning new things, measure of your knowledge prior to the start of play. I like it. Get rid of PowerPoints. My strong suggestion. So don't use that. You have more than enough things you can use intelligence for. Languages, solid. An extra language per positive modifier. You could phrase that better, but I'll fix that in my edit suggestions. If your intelligence decreases, you do not forget the languages you know. Good point. Very good point. You do not sacrifice the advantages like that. Mage spell damage bonus. I like that. Very good. That's brilliant. Honestly, it's a good point. Also, well, we'll get into that later. Saving throw suggestions. Resisting arcane magic and spells. Parasites that have entered your brain. Yeah. I'm behind on a ton of stuff. I need to cut back on spending too. Yeah. Okay, so you just sent me a message, which is nice. Okay. Common languages. Common, divine, thieves' cant, tongue of the old ones. Solid. Trader's tongue. Sure. Personally, I like your explanation of the common tongue is nice, and it works in fantasy things. You do have other races, too. Do they not have racial languages? You might want to bring those up. Some of the more common ones that would be used. Certainly, if elves are masters of magic in your world, their tongue would probably be there. But they'd also be very familiar with the tongue of the old ones, if that is the tongue of high sorcery or low sorcery, depending on how your game goes. Your cultural languages, your Highlands, your Hillish, your Nomadic. I like that. I like it a lot. Sylvan, I'm assuming that's Elven. I'm assuming Hellish Underhill is more Dwarven or Underknock. You might want to emphasize that for your different races. Or later on have a complete section like that. But yeah, luck. Do you feel lucky? You can. That cries out for more description. Just saying. It should primarily serve for two things. Number one, randomly rolled against to see who gets dirt done to them, and the person with the low roll gets it. I'm good with that. I think that would be a good description of how to use it. If a bad thing is equally likely to happen to everybody in the group, everybody make a luck roll, apply modifiers, and whoever has the lowest roll gets the dirt done to them. Or if a good thing is going to happen to somebody, the same. The luck modifier, all saving throws. Luck is added to every saving throw die roll, even when another stat modifier is also being used. So that is interesting. It's nice. It means that somebody who is both really, really good and really, really lucky have better chances of getting, criticals and such, which is nice. And since you only have a modifier of up to +4, if somebody has like an 18 dexterity and an 18 luck, having a +8, they can only fail on a 1 anyhow. So dodging and doing things is it's just the mechanical things to think about in that circumstance. Resurrection, your luck modifier is added to your character's constitution modifier, and the cleric's wisdom modifier when a cleric tries to bring a character back to life. Solid. I like it. Resurrection is one of those things that should require burning. Obviously, kicking death squarely in the nethers and ripping a soul back is major mojo and should have lasting consequences. But I agree that with all of those things, you should be able to get a pretty positive modifier. You also want to think about the negative modifiers that would be involved, such as for a lesser resurrection, say -1 for every hour that's passed since the body has died, or for greater resurrection, -1 per day. So we'll talk about that as we go down. Power, I would suggest getting rid of that completely. That would make for a grimmer game if everybody has to really consider what they have to sacrifice for those special abilities and powers. Strength, pretty straightforward. It is, but I would not outright say this is pretty straightforward. I say strength is one of the most obvious of skills. If you have it, you are very strong. If you do not have it, you are not very strong. It's pretty straightforward. Burning options. Yeah, we've covered that. Strength and Constitution to make your blood pool. I like it. That's a good mechanic. Solid. Strength modifier affecting melee attacks and melee damage. It's old as hills and it works just fine in your system. Saving throw suggestions. Freeing you from being imprisoned, stuck under a heavy thing, trapped behind bars. Basically, you're using it for your bend bars, lift gates. Treating that as a saving throw. I like it. It's fine. It works well, but you have to remember one thing about that. If you are using that as a saving throw, then your luck is going to apply. Do you want that? If you are getting out of the way of Dragon's Blast, and you're lucky, you have a better chance. If you are trying to bend bars, does luck have any impact on that? Is it anything more than just the effect of your muscles? Might be if you were just lucky enough that these bars are really rusty. But that's a solid mechanic that you want to think about in making that a possibility of a saving throw. Just saying. I'm not saying it doesn't work, and I'm not saying it can't work. But if a person's luck is going to apply to that, then that means if anybody is going to say, I'm using my strength as a saving throw, they're calling on their luck for that. So, something to think about. Wisdom. Yes, wisdom does wisdomy things for judgment and stuff. Wisdom modifier affects clerical spell healing. Solid. Very good. Might it also affect clerical, if clerics get any damaging spells, like say banishing undead, might be a good use for your wisdom as well. Defense, dexterity modifier and wisdom modifier. Never seen anybody who could outthink a sword. I'm not fond of applying wisdom to that, except for certain classes. I mean, monks do it in Dungeons and Dragons, but not personally really fond of that. I understand how it works, but I'm not a fan. Saving throws versus mind control and resistance and overcoming difficulties and such, and illusions and some undead abilities. Yeah, that works well, especially against fae and ensorcelments and enchantments. Many of them would attack the wisdom, and that works just fine in your game. Then we get several pieces of art, filling up a couple of pages. And then you start to talk about, now we get on to the game mechanics, where you start talking about derived stats, and these are the things that are going to be applied to success ranges. Your attack bonus. Solid. Miscellaneous attack bonuses based on your attribute, and then, well, we'll get into those. Blood pool, Constitution plus Strength. I'm fine with that. It actually, for people who have dump stats and things, that really kind of emphasizes that most of these different abilities are important. Although I think a lot of people are going to treat appearance as a dump stat. If nothing else, it is something so that warriors have a pool in which they can not die, and I approve of that. PowerPoints, I don't like them. I prefer to have people sacrificing and exhausting themselves. Just my point of suggestion, but yeah, I would get rid of PowerPoints and the power stat altogether. Saving throws. Basic saving throw, adding 1 to the luck modifier and some other stat modifier that applies, and roll a d10. So if you take 1 plus a luck modifier, assuming an average character will have maybe a +1, so that's 2, and to a stat modifier, say it's something they're good at, and they probably might have as much as a +2. say they're not, 18 stats, so they're +4, but, +2, so 1 plus 1 plus 2 is +4. And then and then applying it, if a player rolls within this range on a D10, they have avoided the danger. So, I like it. It's a solid mechanic. It means low rolls are good, which means that if you're going to be penalized, you have one of two ways of doing it. You can do it by shrinking the success range or making additions to the total on the die roll. The latter is the better between the two. You've already come up with derived math to get to a success range. You don't want to go back. So, again, adding luck and an attribute means saving throw ranges could get really, somebody who's got a really high luck, say an 18 luck, you are dealing with somebody who saving throws aren't going to affect very often. They're going to make most of them, and that's cool. It's nice to have genuinely lucky people. If you think about fantasy characters that do survive for long careers, like Conan. Well, Conan's got to have an 18 luck. I mean, quite frankly, for all the stuff that he's gone through, he's clearly extraordinarily lucky to have weathered most of what he does. And I'm fine with this. I like this in your mechanic. I like it in the game. It makes narrative sense, and it makes realistic sense. Rolling a 10 on a saving throw is a fumble, and rolling a 1 is a critical success. Fumbles mean the effects are worse than normal. Critical success means that you have suffered no ill effects. That means that when you are discussing effects of things, you are going to have success, saving throw succeeded, saving throw failed, and saving throw critically failed, which is fine. For a lot of times that's going to be relatively easy. You could just say, an extra half again as much damage or what have you on a critical failure. But remember, those critical failures are happening 10% of the time. If you have D&D and you critically succeed on a 20 and you critically fail on a 1, that's only 5% of the time. So these criticals are going to happen fairly often and consistently in these games. Again, mechanically, just something to keep in mind. Another thought, just going to throw this out here. If you don't want luck to have such a dramatic impact on saving throws, of course you allow burning. So if you roll a critical fumble, you can burn a point of luck and get a success out of it, which is fine. That emphasizes that, so that actually obviates what I was going to say. Good job, you. Character creation. Interestingly enough, we get to character creation after we've gone through all of that, which is... I've seen games do both, all the way at the beginning before they describe any of the rest of the stuff. They talk about making the character. I like it in the middle of the story, as you already know some of the concepts and are familiar. And now here's how you get those stats. That's fine here. Choose a race, roll your stats, record stats, determine derived stats, choose a culture. Sure. It's relatively simple and elegant. Nothing wrong with it. Actually, I am a fan of... And then choosing a class, getting your starting equipment, fleshing out your character. It's straight to the point, one to the next, to the next, to the next. It's a process, and it works for your game, which is good. These are potentials that make this game much more interesting than some of the schlock I've been seeing lately. More art, more art. When you have full panels of art, and it's stock art... I personally think it weakens the product a little bit because it looks like filler. It makes it easier on somebody who's editing because there's less that you have to, do, but just if it doesn't really impact whatever's going on around it, make sure that your art is concise and to the point. These pictures of vistas and caves and everything are fine. But maybe you're imagining them as they're printed out. I I would probably focus on things that really give you a sense of the sacrifice and the hardships of the world. And you do have some very nice art. Race. Your character's race will give the die combinations needed to roll for your character's stats. I like that. Not since Shadowrun, where your race gave definite caps and things on how your attributes were done, have I seen it as effectively as you've got it, which is nice. Each one has their own unique special abilities. You can mix and match race and culture in different ways. I like it. Again, it's got an elegance to the creation. I especially like the flaming skull as a torch image that you've got below that. It's just a nice picture. It's kind of dark. I like dark. Dwarf. Combat 30 feet, turn 90, -1 to movement. We really didn't describe movement as a statistic to have it applied as a number, but it works for success tests with chases and things like that. So I would make sure that I probably describe that. Like a chase is a series of opposed success tests where your success range is modified by your speed. That would be an effective way of describing what you're using that for. Then we get into a section which I've looked at it a few times and I am not seeing. You've got some numbers bracketed here, and I'm struggling to recall what these are for. Movement for a dwarf, movement combat 30, turn 90, -1. Saving throw bonus +3, bracket 2. So if this is a checks and balance system and you're talking about buying racial abilities and things like that, perhaps. I didn't get that from my reading, so not sure. Your derivative numbers, it's a nice range with different races having different scalings. Really don't have a problem with that in any of the races that I've seen. You have all of them have their strengths and all of them have their weaknesses, so I'm fine with that. Blessings to Stone, a damage defense absorption. You really haven't described a defense absorption up to this point, so you might want to reference the combat section where that will be in the final product. That's an editing issue. Dwarves get a +2 bonus. Greedy when wealth is involved. You should describe the +2 bonus, or when you get a bonus and when you get a penalty. That's actually a useful distinction to get. That has no bonus. The GM adjudicates when this comes into play, and that's fair. The penalty should, of course, come to resisting temptation, and the bonus should be in being swayed from their purpose when it involves money. I don't know. I'm sure you've got an idea with that. That one's something that will have to be described out a bit better. A short little paragraph probably is not going to be enough for some of these abilities. Hardship and Toil, +15 blood points. That's like having an entire extra high stat just for being a dwarf. That's a big advantage. I know the right weapon can whittle that down quickly, but you're already giving them a bonus to their armor, and you're giving them a lot of extra blood points. So, especially if you get rid of power points. So I would knock that down by a bit, quite a bit. Also, bear in mind too that with dwarves, I'm not saying bear in mind like you're going to likely to forget this, but dwarves already have a minimum strength of 11 for strength and 13 for constitution. So they're already going to have at least 24 blood points from just their already high stats in those categories. Adding more hit points on top is really going to make them tanky as far as balance goes. Almost all fighters of any renown are going to be dwarves because they're not going to have to sacrifice all the time because they have the hit points to take some beating. So that extra huge chunk of blood points might be a little over the top for how much you have. But I don't disagree that they should have some. And again, 2 in brackets. That was a pretty significant bonus. If we're getting rid of the PowerPoints, that which basically just rules them out from some spell casting mostly, that bonus gets bigger. So, hatred +2 to attack and damage rolls versus a single race or type of monster. For example, goblins. Yeah, and I would probably have that tied to their culture. Think about having, if everything is on a point buy, if all these skills are something that you can buy as a particular type of dwarf, to go along with advancements down the road, blood pool bonus, sure, saving throw bonus versus poisons, yeah, that works for dwarves. You might think about, upping that a little bit more. Just saying. Elves are faster. No penalty to their movement. 40 and 120 move. Saving throw bonus a +2. That's worth a point. Okay. Appearance is trending higher than the dwarves, which makes sense. Your picture is nice and macabre with the person with the deer or a caribou skull on their head, and the elf. I like it. It's dark and creepy. It fits your game. Lower strength on average, fairly average constitution, no real bonuses, very high dexterity, quite high intelligence. Again, those are their stats, whereas the dwarf was all about the physical strength. Low luck, which is interesting. You might want to have a blurb about how elves are kind of cursed, that they generally don't tend to be very lucky. That might be a useful bit to include. Power 1d6 +12. Again, we're getting rid of the power, so you might want to prop the luck up a little bit more. Just a thought for elves. Wisdom, again, they're somewhat held back in their wisdom from achieving the higher potential, but that's relatively easy to describe in their culture and their race. Old Stole, they take no stat damage from demons, devils, extraplanar beings, or undead. You might want to rule that they can take blood loss, however. Somebody might try to say, well, they can't hurt me then. No, they can still kill you. Just they can't do stat damage. And I would almost say they can... You might want to think about some stat damage that they might be able to take. Maybe not wisdom damage or intelligence damage, but physical. Unless you've got a reason why your elves are immune to physical damage, strength, constitution, maybe dexterity. If they have attacks that can damage your stats, that might be a thing that they aren't immune to. Secret Fire, PowerPoints, we don't have that anymore. So we'd want to think of a way around that. If I would say maybe give them a pool, say an arcane storage, whereon they can ignore the first 5 points of exhaustion from casting magical effects a day. That would be an advantage that would work in with the system. Just a thought. Instead of Secret Fire. Spellburner, +4 stat burn points per level. They can be used in place of burning stats on a 1-for-1 basis. Okay, a buffer that they can burn rather than burning stats. That's fine. It's cool, and it's a neat ability. Advancement, blood pool bonus smaller than the dwarfs, and I like that. Saving throw bonus, a bonus versus paralysis. I'm fine with that. More art. Goblins. I like goblins. Generally, they're small and they're not as quick as humans and elves, but you got them quick, so yeah, that's fine. That's a conscious choice. Nice bonus to their saving throw, +3. That's cool. I like your picture of the goblin. The full helm and everything. It's cool. Statistics, fine with that. Really high constitution, really high dexterity. Potential for being really high in strength. They don't have any huge weaknesses outside of appearance. Goblins could be really, really powerful in your game. As opposed to most games where goblins are on the puny side. Most players, they're down on the list unless they think of making a cute goblin for something. So just something to think about. I think they're a little steeper stats-wise as far as balance goes. Animal affinity, they like one type of animal. I'm fine with that. It's nice. It's a neat little special ability for them. Ornery blood, penalty in their blood points, and a bonus to power points. If we're getting rid of power points, goblin blood can replace a sacrifice that is called for. I would say that their blood is magical, and that they can use their blood points instead of burning intelligence and wisdom stats for magic. That would be interesting. I thought it would be cool to have, from first reading this though, to have a goblin running around you could just tap for magical power. If goblins are frequently used for mana batteries, that would make them very unique in your world, which I like. But that's up to you if that's how you wanted to, you ever intended to use them. From their diminutive size, though, I would say a penalty to their blood pool is certainly appropriate compared to all the advantages they have in higher stats. Iron Stomach can eat anything. That's good. Solid ability. I think it's a little high. It's not going to have a lot of adventuring advantage, so typically, unless that represented a advantage against poisoning and things like that, I would only give it a single point. Slaves of Pain, goblins have a -1 pain penalty. Interesting. That would make them rather tough fighters who could take a beating and not be negatively affected by it much. So, it's a thought. Advancements, blood pool bonus, small, but, that's fine. Saving throw bonus, a +1 to pain. Okay. I don't recall what stat gave bonuses versus pain, if it was Constitution or if it was Wisdom, so... Or did we just add in a new saving throw stat? Not sure. I'll have to go back and look at that at some point. Gnomes. Gnomes are really slow. Slower than dwarves. Okay. Bigger bonus saving throws. Again, they have an advantage to power points if we're getting rid of those. And immune to illusion spells, that's outright immunity is kind of a rough thing. A bonus to saving throws is relatively easy to stomach. And complete immunity, generally that requires a strange mindset or something. So, you might want to describe why they would have outright immunity. A bonus, though, certainly, or an automatic saving throw against saving throws might be... against illusions might be more called for. As far as their stats go, nothing too terrible. Really high intelligence, of course. Very good constitution. Getting rid of power. Yeah, all in all, solid. Gnomes are immune to illusion. Okay. Soul Forge, if a gnome burns 1 point of any stat, they can create a minor magical item. I'm fine with it. Depending on how significant your minor magical items are, you need to get some descriptions of that sooner rather than later for somebody to use your things. But if you use the exhaustion, you could have a temporary minor magical item, possibly. You also should have some description on the mechanics and how that works. Think to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, where if you have an ability, it'll give a description of how long it takes, how often you can use it, and what it involves. But yeah, it's a minor magical item, a magical sword. These are all things that you should consider for such a pliable ability. Tinkerer, if a gnome spends an hour and spends a power point or more, they can make just about any non-magical thing, even without the proper materials or tools. Now, there you're talking about just mass creation. And I'm, for the most part, am fine with it. Again, you're really starting to get into, messing with the fabric of creation and just be randomly spawning things. That doesn't have a lot to do with tinkering at that point if they can do it without materials or tools. They're not tinkering anymore. They're just magically willing things into being at that point. But again, exhausting or burning for that effect would be interesting. Very underfoot. They are very small and cannot use large weapons, and medium weapons must be wielded two hands. Awesome. It's fine. They have a +2 to their defense. That's nice, but you're including a disadvantage in there where they can't use bigger weapons and things, so those kind of wash a little bit, don't they? So I don't know if I would include those as a 2-point cost, just as a thought. Blood pool bonus of +1 at 0 cost. Again, if these costs are things that they're going to earn as they go, then effectively 1 point is free. They can be taken as often as they want. I'm not entirely certain how the advancements are working in your game. So, saving throw bonus +1 versus arcane magic. Is that something they have, or is that another part of these advancements? Because it doesn't have a number that is bracketed. More art. Halflings! I like halflings. You have a Jawa as your picture for the halfling, which makes me giggle a little bit. Again, they are slow, the slowest dwarves. Big bonus to saving throws. Nice. High constitution, very high dexterity. Fine with that. Very high luck. Very, very high luck. Luck higher than their dexterity. Okay. Strength is on the lower side. Wisdom is on the average. For the most part, you balance things pretty well with everybody having a similar spread. I would just say Gnome could go out with an 18 strength. At their size, 3d6 gives them a chance of going out with an 18 strength. Not a very good chance, but a chance nonetheless. Halflings have no chance of that. The most they can have is a 13. And yet, I think gnomes, the way you have them presented, are smaller. Something you might want to look about when you're balancing. Deadeye bonuses to range attacks and range damage. That's a nice advantage. Underfoot, same thing as the gnomes, but they only have a +1 bonus to their defense. Yeah, not as many penalties, not as much of a bonus. Yeah, that's okay. Unremarkable, aside from the fact that they're halfling. Can use the innate spell-like ability, 1 power point again. Yeah. Is that necessary if you already have a stealth mechanic? You might want to just give them a bonus to their stealth mechanic for that. And unremarkable, I would say innately still or something like that. Halfling stillness. More so than unremarkable. That just makes them sound like they're kind of homely. Small point to their blood pool bonus. Bonus of saving throw versus traps. Traps are a category that give their own saving throw? I'm sure you could probably narrow that down somehow. But, I'm as far as mechanics, it's far from the most startling one. So, not bad. Humans! We are us. No bonuses, no penalties. Worst saving throw bonus for humans. We die a lot, apparently. Place the following dice combination any 4 of the 8 attributes. 2d6 plus 6. And then the following dice combinations and the remaining 4 attributes. 2d6 plus 4. So they have potentials for 18s, but not quite as strongly as the other races all have to get an 18 in their special stat. They're going to have several attributes that are going to be at most 16, which 16 is still good in your system. So it's not bad to be a human. Adaptable, you get 4 extra skill points. So far, the humans are the only ones who have had skill points. So that's a mechanic that could probably be spread out to the other races. Some of those other abilities might work as racial skill points more so. They could show how flexible we are. Yay. Try to think of some sort of boon you would like to have for your character. A mechanical bonus or something that relates to a setting the GM is using. You can have a membership in an exclusive club, cult, fraternity, guild, secret order. Okay, that's neat. I don't know if it's worth 3 points compared to everything else if you're talking on a relative scale. Might be a relatively small thing. It depends on the game. It's very, very up in the air as to how useful that could be to somebody. But it is an advantage, and you're kind of struggling to give humans advantages. I can understand that. It's not a terrible thing. We are fraternal people. Linguistic, 1d6 additional languages. Roll the die and pick the ones that are available in the setting. Okay. Randomness in bonuses like that can work for you or against you. I'm really not opposed to it. Again, you really don't describe what those bracketed numbers are up to this point, though, so... And I am approaching this, although I have read your work a couple of times now, I'm approaching this the way that somebody is going to read this from beginning to end, so... boon, get an additional boon. Yeah. Blood pool bonus. It's cool. I like your totem art in the next page after humans. Perfectly fine with that. Then we have orcs. It's popular to have orcs. For some reason, orcs are very, very zippy. They are the fastest race. Orcs should pretty much wipe out feudal societies since they can outrun everything. Just something to think about. They have that penalty to saving throws, which is kind of harsh. They can be beautiful. 3d6 appearance. I would be tempted to put that as a dump stat, though. They can be prettier than they can be wise. Okay. They're typically going to be very strong and very high constitution. Yep. Potential for being very dexterous. Not very intelligent. Still potential for being solidly lucky. And still for a pretty good propensity for power. So I would probably knock that down and... It'll be an interesting thing to balance some of these out. If you get rid of the power statistic... and look at rebalancing things a little bit for these races. The orc right now is pretty powerful in a lot of areas, but only a few disadvantages. Boar strength +2 to all melee damage rolls. That's big. That's nice. Rolling 2d10 and taking a better result when a roll is modified by a strength modifier for breaking or lifting things. That's a big advantage too. So that's... I would probably say just make 2 rolls, though. Make 2 rolls against your for a strength success check for things like that. It's a little complicated. You're basically giving yourself a free reroll for breaking and lifting things. Start of each round, orcs remove 1 pain penalty or reduce 1 point of bleeding. Their black blood coagulates quicker. So it's kind of like they regenerate a little bit. Or they lose their penalties rapidly. I like that. It's a nice approach. It's a solid mechanical advantage to orcs. Ever watchful being of wrath, orcs are never surprised and must instantly respond with violence when startled. Interesting. It's simply instinctual. Inanimate objects or living beings are often the targets of this unbridled brutality. Well, yeah, if it's not a living being, then it's an inanimate object. There's kind of no middle ground, so that's not very useful. This ability negates any extra sneak attack damage from rogues that would be dealt to them. So rogues can never sneak attack orcs. I don't like that very much. I don't see a reason why orcs can't be sneak attacked. That's a pretty big bonus, honestly. But, these are your orcs. These aren't generic fantasy orcs. That's a pretty powerful ability, all things considered, though. Magic devours when you kill a foe and eat part of them. Any remaining power points they have get added to your character on a 1-to-1 basis as blood points. Interesting slant. I would say they could help to restore exhaustion, but that would work quite well. Not a bad thing. Advancements, big points for blood pool, so that's nice. So you've got all the basic fantasy races covered. You have a mix of nice abilities and some brand new things that are unique to your game, which is nice. At this point, you really don't have to apologize because you're lifting things from other games. You have a lot of unique stuff of your own right here where we are, so, that's solid. Nothing wrong with this. Okay, so culture, deep underworld, underknock +2 language, weapon, medium +2 damage, and piercing +1 damage. Okay, I'm fine with doing more damage. I would probably give a better range to hit, though. Just my thought. You're already having a relatively small scale of 1 to 10 as far as a range that you can affect. So, knowing how to use a weapon and how to make it hurt more, I don't have a terrible problem with this. It's going to make your combat deadlier. You already are obviously familiar with that. So, all in all, these aren't bad. Giving yourself different languages and different abilities. You probably also, since you have skill points, though, you might want to include some skill points from the different cultures, just as a thought. Your nomadic ones are probably going to have some survival and some riding. Your oceanic will probably have sailoring, stuff like that. Classes! First level players get to choose a class. Yay. Cleric! Clerics performing miracles. Okay. You want to emphasize the sacrifice nature of this? Start talking about those gods demanding extra of their clerics. Talk about how the relationships, how clerics fear their gods and serve them out of fear as much as they do devotion and reverence. They get power, but they're also a lot asked of them. That'll set the tone. You get it to the nice, comfortable feelings of clerics and their support character class, and let them know that, to serve their god, it may require sacrifice often. Gods move in mysterious ways, and their intentions are seldom revealed in their followers, except they love sacrifice. Clerics can wear any armor. Yay, we're going with fantasy. Clerics. I like the picture of the cleric. I wonder where you got that from. I don't recognize the name, but it's cool. Weapon damage. It's fine. Interesting that your weapon damage is different by the class that you have, and then modified by your strength and by your culture. That's an interesting take. Not a lot of people take that kind of take. It's all pretty much been following D&D, so I'm fine with it. It's not a bad mechanic. Range, small 1d2, medium 1d4, large 1d6. What would be large ranged weapons? I have to look at your table again. So, weapon size, attack modifier. Small gets a +1, large gets a -1. So, generally you imagine clerics as using a single one-handed weapon, which would be considered medium. I would probably give the medium the +1 and the small the 0. But that's just me. They're more used to using like a mace or something. Give them a slight bonus to that style. Advances, 1 per level. I like this idea of having, different advances that they can get. Rolling randomly. I don't know if I'm the biggest fan of that necessarily, because some of these really only work, a limited number of times. You can roll, for instance, things like attack bonus melee +1. Is that the only time that you can get that, or can you get that multiple times? Blood of the Martyr, you can roll 1d6 and reduce your blood points by that many, and harm or heal another creature by twice that amount. So you're talking your healing spells. The blood leaks out of their eyes. Interesting, nice flavor to it. I would also recommend that it can manifest in bleeding wounds, a la the stigmata. For every additional time you get this ability. So you can get these abilities multiple times. Rolling randomly could be an interesting dynamic if you dictate that the gods determine how you improve and not necessarily the player. Human experience says that you get better at what you practice, though. So, you know, I don't prefer random tables for advancement, but they might work in your game. Just something to think about, though. Maybe make it so that you can only pick one of these abilities so often. Like if you only pick the +1 to melee every 3 or 4 levels, so that you can't just spike up. Fighters can pick it every 2 levels, for instance. Fighters get a bonus +1, and that continues to go up, so they don't have to worry about that. Dying Strike, when you or one of your allies are falling unconscious or dying, you get a free attack that's automatically successful. It's also considered a critical hit, so auto criticals are, well, it's a powerful ability. You just have to convince your allies to keep falling unconscious so that you get free attacks, but it's interesting. I don't know. I would probably pick that as a more powerful ability that they can get as a matter of leveling and such. It's not terrible, though. Specialization, choose a weapon, and with it you deal out an additional d4 damage. Nice. Per fighter level. That means your weapons are going to be brutal. That might be a bit much. I know it's only a d4, but you're going to use that, swing that sword every time. So, weapon damage, small 1d6, medium 1d8, or 1d10 with 2 hands, large 2d6. Standard weapon damage progression. Not bad. Ranged 1d6, medium 1d8, large 1d10, small +2, medium +1, large +1. So you are adding bonuses on bonuses on bonuses on bonuses. Obviously, you are going to have creatures whose defenses are going to inflict penalties on your chances to hit. So you are giving your fighters some significant combat advantages over, say, that cleric did. Advances. Blood on enemies. By pouring or smearing the blood of recently killed foe into your wounds, you can heal. Oh, all those bloodborne diseases. So yes, on the round after you kill them, if you do nothing but do that, you can heal. Or stop 1d2 points of bleeding. That's dark, and I like it. It's got a nice flavor for your world. Extra attack, you can attack once more per round. You should probably put a limit on how many times you can roll that, or how often that can come up. I'm fine with not having a defined progression like D&D has, where 3rd and 5th edition, where you get this ability here, then this ability here, then this ability here. I'm fine with having a more open, fluid structure, but some of these, you got to have limits on how many times they can have them. Somebody gets lucky and rolls nothing but 2s and ends up with like 6 attacks per round at 6th level. Just a whirlwind of destruction at that point. Favorite enemies, you can pick a form of life, get a +2 to attack and damage against them. That's perfectly fine. Fighters should always have had that ability. It shouldn't just be rangers in D&D games, honestly. So, yeah, that would work. Fighter brawling and grappling, you get to add fighter level as an attack bonus when brawling or grappling. So, yeah, I'm fine with that. You also get to add extra damage, so you'll need to have that all in the description of that in the combat, of course. Fighter major wound, your character does not bleed an extra blood point of damage or suffer additional pain penalty when they receive major wounds. Okay. For every additional time you get this ability, you ignore 1 point of blood loss per combat. That's cool. That's all under the combat section, so we'll address that as we go. Fighter parry, every -1 you take to your melee roll, you add +1 to defense bonus. Yeah, I'm fine with that. It's a nice little skill that keeps you going. Range damage, increase small, medium, and large. Increase the damage for that die by 1 dice step. Okay, I'm fine with that. I don't have a significant problem. Somehow still standing during a combat. Character can continue to fight even when other characters would have fallen. They continue to fight on, even with negative blood points, until they die standing on their feet. Every additional time you get this ability, you add 1d10 temporary blood points at the start of each combat. Removed first before regular blood points. Okay, so you're getting a blade of armor, basically. I'm fine with that. It's not a bad thing. You don't have a description on exactly how that goes, unless you're talking... no, actually, that works just fine. Weapon damage, you deal out an additional 4 points of damage per hit. Does that stack with everything else? And 4 points is an awful lot. Just saying. With my bare hands, the character's fists are considered to be medium-sized bludgeoning melee weapons. Sure, fine with that. That works. Every additional time you get bonuses, yeah. It's going to seem rather puny compared to some of the other abilities, though. Balancing-wise, there are some issues with it, but I don't think it's unbalancing. It's just a little underwhelming if you get that later in your career. Mages! Yes. Magic is the thing that I recommend reworking, mostly because I think an exhaustion system and sacrifice would work better for your magic system. And obviously your magic system is unfinished. You've got a lot of open areas there where you're basically saying, crib these spells from other things and call them different names. I think we can probably do a little bit better than that if you wanted to expand this out. If you want to save that for a Magic Librum, that's fine. But I think you definitely need to have more sampling suggestions. Again, for a new player coming into the game. It's going to be more work, though, if you do that. But I highly recommend it. It would make your work complete, and it would make it stronger. And ultimately, that's a good thing. At this point, we are now halfway through your book. I have been doing this for a while and throwing out a lot of things to digest. I will do a second half of this where we will go through the rest, including your combat systems and mechanics and the other classes and the magic system, because I have more suggestions for that. But for the most part, it's a lot of good things. I'm suggesting a lot of changes and things like that, but most of it is just to try to draw out things into this game, to make it more unique, to make it more yours, and to broaden the feeling of connection somebody is going to get when they read this and want to use it for themselves. As of right now, it's good. It's got a lot of good points to it, and it can be used as it stands. But I think you have a potential for really ratcheting things up into your world and adding on to your own fiction just by completing a lot of the concepts, fine-tuning, paring down a few things. I think could really make for an elegant game with a dark heart that gives people a genuine option for a new game to pick up. Who knows? Somewhere down the road, when we're done with all of this, and you finally give it your stamp of approval and put it out, you might have any winner on your hands, opening up a new IP to stand along with some of the big ones out there. I don't know if you've got the time and wherewithal to make a new Lamentations of the Flame Princess, but I see a lot of the mechanics in here that are unique enough that with a bit of embellishment and a bit more detail, we could definitely punch this up into a proper full role-playing game. But I hope that this helps. I hope that my words here give you something to think about. And I will be giving you those full edits soon. At least I'll give you a chunk of them. It's been taking me a while because of my health, but I'm healthy now, and I'm ready to start pouring more effort into helping you with your game. So I will upload this tonight, so to give you something to look at, and we'll go on from there. So I look forward to hearing from you again. And, yeah, we'll see you then. Farewell.